What is going on, people? The other day I released a video mentioning GameMaker is now free, and then I thought to myself, why don't I make tutorials for people getting into game development? I constantly see people on Discord asking fairly easy questions, and I figured I have 7 years of experience in the game engine, so why not? Well, here you go. GameMaker fundamentals for new developers or individuals looking to learn GameMaker. First thing first, GameMaker is available for Windows and Mac. They work the same on both operating systems. The engine consists of a few hundred megabytes, so a fairly small download, and receives updates at least once every 3 months. For now, you can ignore all of the other versions and just install the recommended one. After installing the engine, you will want to make a free account and log in. And so now we are at the start page. Here you have no game projects, or you shouldn't at least, downloading for the first time, so we will be creating a new one. But first, I would like to point out that there's reference templates that you can work off of. So these different templates here to get an understanding of how to create a game by looking at a few examples. And for this video, I wanted to point out 2 things. GameMaker offers you 2 options when creating a game. You have GML Visual, which is a visual scripting tool that can be used to create games without coding. Great for individuals who are jumping into game development for the first time, or individuals that may not be coming from a coding background. And GML Code, which is GameMaker language code. GML is similar to Java Object-Oriented or C++, in case you were wondering. It is quite easy to learn and pretty forgiving on syntax. For this video, we are going to create a GML code project, but it shouldn't matter too much since we're just going over the fundamentals for this video. So let's create new game. Give your project a name, and here we have our default layout. If you take a look at the left, you will see the inspector, which is what we'll use to quickly inspect an object or asset. The inspector is great when needing to quickly get a high-level overview of an asset you're clicking on. On the right here, you will see your asset browser, which is where you will have all of your assets. So this is all of your music, all of your sprites, all of your characters, all of your rooms, all of your scripts. And on the bottom, we have a series of tabs for the output of your game. Depending on the situation, you may want to use different tabs. For example, compile errors, output to see if the game is running, feather images to see if you have any suggestions on improving code or anything that isn't used, warnings, errors, so on and so forth. In the center, we have our workspace, and this is where all the fun happens. The workspace is where you'll be doing most of your work, like coding, adjusting sprites, music, whatever. Anything that will be edited will be done here. And lastly, we have our options menu, starting over from File all the way to Help in Source Control. Then right below it, we have a bunch of options, like create a new project, run game, stop game, debugging, options, so on and so forth. And what I want to do here for the asset browser is kind of just elaborate more. Now, let me zoom in a bit. I'm just holding control and scrolling with the wheel. You also have this down below where you can kind of zoom in and out. Pretty much everything in this asset browser section, these are just all different folders. And the idea is you want to create assets and kind of organize them. So as you may notice, rooms is the only folder that seems to have this directory or this arrow looking thing filled up. That means, well, it's the drop down. That means that there's actually an object in here, so it's not empty, and you have your default room. Starting off with animation curves. Animation curves are a type of asset that allows you to create a curve and apply it to an animation. This will then change the behavior of the animation, giving it personality. This is a great tool for animating user interface in games, and this is also something that you can create in code, so you can create your own desired effects in code as well. Next, we have extensions, which you can ignore for now, but extensions are pretty much to assist you with creating a library of functions that you can use across multiple projects. So that way you can import the same scripts from a different project into an existing project. Fonts, pretty self-explanatory, straightforward. You can select your own type of font, give it a size, and then reference it. Notes, I don't really use notes. A text file where you can keep notes. Oftentimes, if you are going to be working off extensions or someone else's project as a template, there may be a bunch of notes explaining what different functions do, and you can also do the same. You can also keep track of all your work. I actually use like Microsoft OneNote to keep track of everything, so I don't really use notes. I tried in the past, but really is your cup of tea. Next, we have objects. Objects are pretty much objects in the room, so this is going to be an asset that you will be creating for nearly everything An object can be a person, it can be a thing, it can be a collision, it can be whatever. Just like in the real world, anything that can be an object, that would pretty much be an object in GameMaker. Particle systems, we can kind of skip that for now. We can skip paths for now. Rooms are essentially rooms in the game or maps in the game. Scripts are scripts that you can create in GameMaker, so think of them as like methods that you can create and then reference them. Next we have sequences. I'm not going to get too much into this one, but the sequence is pretty much an asset where you can put together like cutscenes. And you can also utilize animation curves to do certain behaviors and functions to animations. What's really cool about sequences is it has its own window here. And once you apply some frames or whatever, you can then start tossing assets in. And then you can go ahead and like give them different behaviors or what have you. And then you can save that as a sequence and you can play it, and you can do a cutscene or what have you. It's a pretty flexible tool. Next up is shaders. Shaders in the game development world is you manipulating the output on the screen. You can apply it to the screen, you can apply it to a character or an object or whatever. Not going to get into that one. Sounds are sounds. This is where you import your audio, open up whatever sound you choose, and then you have some options here as well. Sprite, this is pretty cool. So GameMaker offers you a built-in sprite editor. So if you click on edit image, you can now like kind of start to create whatever you'd like. On the top left you can add more frames. If you hit play, it's going to play the animation. You go back to sprite, you can change the animation, how fast you want the animation to play. Tile sets are just tile sets. You will need a sprite to start using tile sets, so you'll create your own tile set somewhere. It could be in GameMaker or whatever. And then once you have that, it'll be a sprite, and then you can take your sprite and turn it into a tile set. Then with the tile set, you can use the tile set in the room, and then create a tile layer and use whatever we just created. We can now start like creating the room. So this really isn't going to help us, but you can kind of get an idea here. And then lastly, we have timelines. We can ignore timelines for now, but pretty much it's an asset that you can reference moments, and then with those moments you can have pieces of code that run. Alright, so now that we have an idea of where things are, what do we need to do in order to start working on our epic game? Well, the engine starts you off with the blank room and a default camera showing everything in that room. In order to start our game, let's click on play. And as you may see here, you'll have to target a different platform. So this popped up in a browser on a different screen. Let's head over to Windows and run this again. So stop and then play. And as you see, our game is just a blank room. Mainly because we didn't add anything. This is just a blank project. So let's change that. Starting off with our room object, let's open this up. So I just went to the rooms folder, and again, GameMaker starts you off with a blank room every time you create a blank game. And if we double click on the asset here, a new tab will open, so a new different type of workspace, which is the room. On the left here we have our inspector. And in our inspector we have instances, we have background. So in the background we can add a background sprite, or we can change the color. Let's change this to be like grayish or so. Then you also have some other properties below. Let's click on the room one more time. If you look at the room inspector, you can take a look at the resolution, or how large the room is, width by height. This is all in pixels. Here you will notice viewports and cameras, which is not enabled by default. However, they offer you flexibility to adjust the view and output of your game. If you're looking to make a pixel art game, you'd want to enable this view first, then adjust the camera properties to show less pixels, and then adjust the viewport properties to show something larger, which will upscale your game. Okay, so let's make a very basic game. And to keep it interesting, I have no idea what we'll be creating. Let's just put things together and see where this ends up. Starting off with our character. And as I mentioned, GameMaker has a built-in sprite editor, so let's create them right now, give them some logic, and put together a game. For the sake of being structured, let's head over to the sprites folder. We're going to right click, go to create, head over to sprite. It's going to create sprite 1 default. So we're going to rename this as S player. which is pretty much just sprite player. You can name them whatever you want. Where it says size here, we have width and height. So this is going to be 64 by 64 pixels. So we pretty much have a box. And if you click on edit image, we're just going to have one frame. We're going to click on the fill tool and let's toss in a random color. Okay, there we have it. Our player is just going to remain a box for now. Let's close this out. We're back in our workspace, and if you zoom out, you're going to notice that once we start working on the game some more, we're going to have a bunch of other assets start to fill up this workspace. So definitely make sure you start closing things. Like for example, if you were to go here and create one more sprite, all of a sudden we have 2 sprites open in the same workspace. So for now, let's just close this. We only have 1 sprite open, which is fine. We're going to delete the second one that we just created. Next up, we're going to head over to objects, right? Go to create and click on object. So here we have object 1. Now, you may be wondering, why can't we just take sPlayer, toss him into the room, and then start working off the sprite? Because we can't really do that. This is just a sprite. It doesn't have any logic to it. When we create an actual object, we can give it a sprite and start giving it some logic. And so let's say we went back to our room and we wanted to actually take this sprite and put it in the room. Well, we can't use the instances layer. We can't use the background layer. We will have to create an asset layer for sprites. And then in the asset layer, we can only do certain things because it's just a sprite or picture. But if we go back to object, we're going to name this one oPlayer for object player. We can now do many things. So you're going to notice is right off the bat, you can assign a sprite to this object. So what we're going to do, you can click here and go to sprites and type in, click in sprite player, or you can go to the folder, drag and drop here. You're also going to notice is that there's a collision mask. It's going to same as sprite. If you go back to the sprite, you can give it a collision mask depending on how you want the collisions to work. You want the entire sprite to be colliding with something else or part of the sprite. Go back to object. You have other options here. Is the sprite visible? Is that invisible? That's great for collisions when you want to make invisible objects. Is the object solid? Will it collide with other solids? Is it persistent? Will it follow you to another room in the game? Does it use built-in physics? And then managed. This is most likely, looks like a rollback multiplayer function. I haven't really messed around with this feature, but then you're going to notice is that there's a bunch of other options here. So you're mainly going to want to work in events. Parent is if you have a parent object, if you want to inherit parent behaviors from another object. So if you're making a boss, you can make like a main boss object and then make a bunch of children objects from the boss. And then you can also create variable definitions, but this may be getting very confusing. We're going to keep it basic for this fundamentals overview here. So the player, once you open up the player, you assign it a sprite. So you're going to notice one thing, that there's going to be an events window open here. So this is where all of the fun is going to happen. I know the workspace is where all the fun happens, but this is where all the fun happens for the player. And so in the events, you can actually tell the player, you can give the player all the logic here. This is where you'll give the player the controls. You can give the player a timers, whatever, what have you. You can change the player's sprites. You can even reference other objects in the game and do all types of fun stuff. But for this video, if you right click or click on add event, you're going to notice that a bunch of options show up. It's going to take a long time to understand what all of these options do. But as a very quick, high level, create is the create event. Whenever the object gets loaded for the very first time, whatever piece of code you put in the create event, so all of this code that you put here is going to run once when the object gets created. Destroy. What do we run when the object gets destroyed? When we destroy the object. Cleanup is for code cleanup. I would kind of ignore this one for now unless you're creating certain logic in the game that you want to clean up and force cleanup upon deletion or whatever. Step event, you just want to use plain step event for now, but pretty much step event is every single frame in the game. So every game has a set FPS, frames per second. Your game should default around 30. So all the code in here is going to run 30 times per second. That's mainly where most of your logic is going to be in the step event. Alarm, these are just setting up alarms. So think of it as triggers, timed triggers. You can say alarm equals 4 seconds. After 4 seconds, all the piece of code in this alarm will go off. And then you can call the alarm whenever you want, depending on the instance or the action that's happening. Draw event, for now, just memorize draw and draw GUI. Draw is drawing in the room. Draw GUI is drawing on the screen. That's drawing on the layer of the screen that you're seeing, you as the player. Drawing in the room is drawing it at an XY coordinate in the actual room. So if you're playing like a game that's zoomed in and you're drawing an instance at 0, 0, you're not going to see, depending on where you're at in the room, you're not going to see that drawing. If you're drawing on the user interface, well, you're going to see it all the time, no matter where you go in the room, because it's drawing on your screen. Mouse, these are just mouse actions. What happens when the player left clicks down, right clicks down, middle presses. Same thing for the keyboard, key down, key up. So different actions when you release a particular key, what happens. Gestures, this is for like I guess mobile games or like web games, like just those different gestures. I guess you can use it for PC games now, really. So you have some gesture logic there. Collision, what happens when you collide with another object. So in this case, what happens when we collide with ourselves? If there were multiple player objects in the room, what logic is there? A bunch of other things that happen, starting the game, ending the game. So these are just all different scenarios. When do you want the piece of code to run? You have a lot of flexibility here. You can say, hey, I want this to run when the game starts. I want this to run when the room starts, like when the character gets created. There's many different things. I will kind of just start off with some of the more basic stuff up here. Everything from create to step, alarm, draw, kind of work your way down and learn these as time goes on. Asynchronous, I can't even begin to explain any of this stuff. This is getting into some networking things. Okay, so I'm going to delete everything here. Hopefully that kind of explained all the different logic. At the end of the day, you're going to have GML code, but it's knowing when to execute the code. In this case, we are going to say create, right? So the player gets created. We're just going to say player speed equals 4, right? Just creating our variables, because this is when the player gets created. We can just define some things. Okay, we're just going to set a value called player speed equals 4, and then later on, if you want to reference it, change it up, whatever, we can do that. So game gets created. Well, in this case, it's not game create, it's instance create or player create, right? Recreate the player. We go to step event. So there's some built-in things that you need to learn as well with GameMaker. So in this case, if you say X, you all of a sudden can manipulate the X position. Y, same thing with Y. If you type in instance, you can do different things. Instant activate, instance deactivate, destroy. If instance exists in the room, like you can compare and find things. So pretty much a lot of the logic here, like the mouse, key down and all that, a lot of these you can just code and you don't have to use everything like you see here. A lot of them you can just code. In this case, a lot of these just make it easy for you to kind of get going, get moving along. But in this case, what we're going to do, let's just leave that alone, right? We just said player speed equals 4. We're just creating a variable. Variable is not even being referenced. We're just creating a blank variable. But we now have an O player. So let's toss O player into the room. In this case, we can't toss him here. We need to click on the instance layer. Let's delete the one I just made on accident. Click on instances. Now we can drop objects to this instance layer. Looks like it created a second instance layer for some unknown reason, but this one should work fine. And we just put them right here in the game. We're going to hit play. And there you go. Now nothing's happening, right? Pressing on the keyboard, nothing's going on here. what I'm going to do is just close this one out, mainly because we don't have any logic, right? We just started creating variables, but we're not using the variables, we're just creating them. So we're creating like a description for the character or whatever, but we're not using any of them. If you go to add events, in this case, let's just keep it simple. We're just going to go to key down, all right? Key down left. Whenever we press the left key, we want the X position of the player to go left. So think of the room as a grid. As you see in the bottom left here, you see these X and Y coordinates. If we were moving left, if we started here, we started moving left. You see how the X goes down, so we're subtracting X. If we wanted to go right, you see how we start off at 660 right here. We're going to go up, and if we want to move to the right, we need to go higher into the X position. So everything's working off coordinates here. If I'm saying X minus 10, okay, well, in this case, we can't say minus 10. We need to say minus equals 10. Because we need to set it to something. Because we want to subtract this X minus 10. So I'll press left, and all of a sudden, our player is moving minus 10. Right? Now, if I take player speed, because this is a variable I created, we can say player minus player speed. So we're going to hit play, same situation, but again, our speed is 4, so we're still moving left, but we're not moving as fast. All right. What I'm going to do is also key down right. So anytime the keyboard, the left on keyboard is pressed down, we move left. Every time it's pressed up, we're going to move right. Okay, left, right. All right, pretty standard stuff. And you may be wondering, well, what about key press down? That means it only happens once. Every time you press the button, key down means if the button's currently being pressed down. And then same thing for key up. Whenever you release the button, it just happens once. So there goes our left and right. Next up, we're going to do up. And we're also going to do down. So for up, we're just going to change this to Y. Oh, what did I do? I guess it never saved. So for up, it's going to stay, but it's just going to be Y minus and Y plus. So let's do this. Y plus and then Y minus when we go down. Oh, it looks like I have it backwards. Y minus. Y down will be plus. And this is because, again, if you put our mouse here, we're at 600, but you see on the y-axis right here, right? We're looking at 380, so if we go up, that's minus. If we go down, that's plus. That's how we came up with that. So let's hit play. There you go. Now we can move. We now have a player that can move around, which is awesome. Okay. And if you guys are interested, if you go over to this creating a step event, right? You can do keyboard key. Okay. Keyboard key press, virtual key left. Okay, and you can kind of do an if statement rather than using the built-in kind of option here, like the visual kind of piece here. What you can do is say, hey, if keyboard's press, keyboard left, or if you're doing WASD, you can do like W, right, or whatever. Then all of a sudden you're going to start moving left. It just replaces this. You can just copy this piece of code and then just kind of like paste it there. It's the same exact thing. and is most probably preferred depending on the situation. Like if you want to prefer using a keyboard or what have you, or different keys. But just to show, we don't really need to utilize all the different events. You're definitely going to want to use step event with your game because it just offers a lot of flexibility, but this works. So then why do we want to use references to variables, right? Because what we're going to do here, we now have movement in the room, but there is no game. Okay. What else can we do here? Well, let's go to create sprite. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Turn this into a 16x16. Apply, edit. I'm going to go here. We're going to, I guess, use a ball. We're going to collect some balls here. Let's put this as yellow. We'll be collecting some yellow balls. Create an object, toss this sprite in. So I'm just going to name this. Let's go back and name this really quick. Let's do like S points, right? S points, and then O points. And pretty much all we're going to do is if this collides with the player, we're going to say other, because we want to reference the player, other dot player speed. We can just say other dot player speed goes up 1, and then instance destroy. We're going to put self inside here, so we're just going to destroy the points and speed up the player. You may not know a lot of these commands. I would just say if you middle click on any of the stuff, it'll open up a manual. I will just kind of go through the manual, go through tutorials, and just learn as much as you can till you feel comfortable with some of the different methods and functions here. And before we do anything else, let's bring some of the points in the game. So let's just bring these around. Let's hit play. And all of a sudden, every time we take a point, we are now faster. Okay. And another thing we can do here, whenever we create the player object, let's say score equals 0. We'll just say p score for player score. If we say score, it looks like it's using a some built-in method or variable or something. Player score equals 0. So we start off with 0. We're going to go to add event. We're going to use the draw GUI event. So it's going to draw on the screen no matter where we're at in the game. And we're going to say draw sprite. Wait, not draw sprite, draw text. Where on the screen? Let's just do 300. We can do this. We can say room width divided by 2, so center it. And then I guess plus 20 is fine, so a little bit below. So that's going to be the X, the Y, and the bottom here we're looking for a string. We're just going to put in P score. And we're missing a comma, right? Let's do this. It looks like something's not right. There we go. Had an extra. All right, so we're going to start drawing the P score. You're going to notice that it's going to stay 0 because we haven't added logic yet to where the score goes up. So it's still showing 0. Another thing here, and I'm kind of just jumping ahead and showing all types of different stuff, but it gets pretty intense. So I'm just going to put FN for font, FN1, and let's just bring this up a bit. Oops, wrong button. It doesn't have to go up. We're going to change the scale to, let's just put the scale at 30. This is how large we want the text to be. And if we go back to player, we're going to say draw set font FN1. So we're setting the font to this new font we just created. This is a default font. I put it at size 30. And so now it's going to, now in the draw event, it's going to force, whenever you say set, draw set anything, it's going to force those settings. All right. So now we have 0 still. This is in the center, which is fine. We can always shift it to the left or to the right depending on the situation, but as you see, it stays 0. So that's that. What we need to do here, if we go back to the points object, we can also say other dot, what was it, p score plus plus. So now every time the player collects a point, the point gets destroyed, the player gets faster, and then it increments by 1. Plus plus is just a shortcut for plus equals 1. Okay. And if you want to take it a step further, we can go and create an object, and you can say, hey, I want to create a controller object. Okay. In this controller object, where you can probably say, you know, alarm 1 equals room speed times 2. These are just all functions and variables that you need to learn here, but alarm 1 equals room speed times 2. And what does that mean? That means that we're going to have an alarm set up here. That's why it's kind of showing like yellow. It doesn't exist yet. Oh, I created alarm 0. We don't need that. Alarm 1, all of a sudden alarm 1 exists. It looks like room speed is going to be deprecated soon, it looks like. But a built-in variable to say that room speed, how many, like if you have 30 frames per second, it's going to take 30 frames per second, times that by 2. So in 60 frames, this alarm goes off. And now we can say instance create depth. If you click on the method here, we have a bunch of options. We're going to do random. Here's the thing, right? We're going to go to the room. We're going to say random 1300 by 700 for just for this example. So random 1300 by random. So we're saying, hey, create this instance randomly between a coordinate 0 and 300 and 0 and 700. Depth is pretty much prioritization, so it's gonna, we'll just keep it at 0. The lower it is, the more it'll prioritize closer to the screen, so it'll overlap the player. If we put it too low, and if we put it too high, it'll kind of be in the back. But in this case, we only have 2 objects, so we don't really care about that. The object we're creating, obj points, and then after that kicks off, we want alarm 1 to create another point in 2 seconds. So this is just going to continue looping over and over. So this controller is saying, hey, create an alarm that goes off in 2 seconds. In 2 seconds, create a point instance, and then re-trigger in 2 seconds. Go into the room, toss this controller in the game, and so now every 2 seconds, now we actually have a game. Every 2 seconds we're going to create, and as you see in the bottom right, it just created one right here. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, right? And there you have it. So the player is getting faster. Every 2 seconds, and then, you know, so on and so forth. We can toss in enemies and do all types of stuff, but then it's going to start getting more and more complex. I feel like it's already getting complex enough here. And we haven't even started adding in like sounds and logic, that, you know, enemy logic or anything like that. One more thing that we can do, we're going to create one more object here. Sorry, I created the wrong thing. We're going to go here and create a sprite. So this is going to be our collision sprite. I'm going to paint it right here. Let's just do an orange. Create another object. Toss this in here. Col S col, short for collision. Go into the room and let's do this. We're gonna say, just gonna add this sprite, this object, I mean. We can also do this logic in the game too, and we can kind of force the player and do checks and say, hey, the player is not allowed to leave the room. The player cannot leave pixels X and X. But what I like to do, just for sake of flexibility here, without having to code everything, we can create an object, mark it as solid, mark the player as solid, and now two solids should collide. So if we hold up, it looks like we're colliding here. Let's do this. We also need to toss in an event, collision. There we go. So now they're both solid and they should be forcing each other to collide. There you go. So I can't go any further. This would just force the player to stay in the room, because at one point you're going to get so fast you're just going to hit a wall. Okay, and there you have it. So one more thing, what we're going to do, we're going to duplicate points here, and we're going to add a game over point. So this is the game. We're going to avoid this point. So let's duplicate the points we have now. And in this case, we're not going to speed up the player, and we're not going to increase the score count. We're going to instance destroy self. Matter of fact, we're going to do room restart. In this case, you want to put some logic in that ends the game, but I'm just going to force the game to restart. Points 4. I'll just call it points 4. Points. Let's just call it lose. Object lose. Sprite lose. And in the controller, how about we do this? We add some more logic. We say I random, so integer random, to so we're gonna roll a dice here and say, get us a number 0, 1, or 2, and we're gonna call this roll. We'll just call it roll. In this case, we're doing it backwards. We're going to say roll equals I random 2. It's going to give me integer random of 0, 1, or 2. And we're going to say if roll is greater or equal to 2, and this is not the best syntax, of course. We should be putting our, let's just toss them in anyway. Toss these in here. Toss those in there. Lose. It's happening. Inconsistent naming. Okay, that's fine. Alright, so what does this mean? We have a chance at spawning points that lose. And if we spawn points that lose, I think I have it backwards. If it's greater than or equal to, how about Yeah, let's points. Now we have a game. Now we have we're kind of rolling a dice here, and we're saying that we have a chance of spawning. There you go. We have our first one. So you want to avoid the red. And as time goes on, you just get so fast you can't not avoid them. And hopefully they don't spawn on top of you, because we haven't added that logic in yet. We could say if that X and Y just so happens to be on the player, then roll again. Oh, there you go. I walked into one of the bad points here. Let's do that again. No, I thought that was bad, but I guess not. Oh, there you go. Game over. All right. So there you have it. Some Game Maker fundamentals here. Hopefully you guys learned something. Very complex. At the end of the day, with enough practice, it isn't too bad. It's just really learning the language and learning what you can and can't do with code, and learning when to do it, and learning how to utilize your different events here and collisions and all that fun stuff. But yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and if you guys would like more tutorials and all that fun stuff. And as you see here, like, our workspace just ends up growing and growing. We definitely have to make sure to close things out as you move along. You can also, I think, right click and close all but this. No, you should be able to right click one of these, close all but this, if you want to clean up. There you go. Anyway, there you have it. Game Maker fundamentals. We actually created a game, and pretty neat. Did that in just a few minutes. So anyway, I'll catch you guys next time.